Hello, my friends, and thank you so much for joining me. So this is a continuation of the series of presentations that I'm doing on biological and biotechnological medicinal products. This particular video, I'm going to be talking or focusing on good tissue practice. So it is a series of presentations that I'm doing to combine what I've worked on in the past, some of the new material that I've read and understood from studying the legislation, regulatory guidelines, and the regulatory frameworks from various regions, and also some of the training courses that I've been on. So I'm going to be talking about good tissue practice. Good tissue practice is just one of the fundamental tenets of good practice. So just as you have good manufacturing practice, you have good laboratory practice, you have good distribution practice, you also have good tissue practice. And good tissue practice ensures the safe and effective management of human tissues and cells used for medical applications. So how does good tissue practice interface with the example that I gave you? Specifically, I'm referring to human materials or human tissues and cells that are used for starting materials for medicinal products. And these medicinal products are biotechnological, biological medicinal products, but they can also include advanced therapy medicinal products. So the primary cells that can be used to form parental cell lines and eventually cell substrates. These primary cells are derived from human beings, and these are human donated tissues or cells. And good tissue practice is the practical application of regulatory frameworks, not just within the European Union, but also within other countries that are not part of the EU, but part of the European region, if you like. And good tissue practice is also practiced in the United States under 21 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 1271. So good tissue practice is, it's I would say worldwide, although I'm not sure that every single country in the world incorporates this guidance, but it is there to ensure the quality and the safety with regards to donation, procurement, testing, processing, preservation, storage, and distribution of human tissues. And in the context of this presentation, we're going to be speaking particularly with regards to human tissues that are used as starting materials. And by starting materials, I mean that they are present, identified in the active substance. So I'm going to talk about the EU directives in the first instance. The EU directives are applicable to European Union and the European Economic Area countries, and they are directives that have been laid out by the EU Council, and these are directions, if you like, and instructions that have that are laid out, and the individual member states have to transpose them into their national laws. So the EU Tissues and Cells Directive 2004/23 EC, this establishes a legal unified framework for the donation, procurement, testing, processing, preservation, storage and distribution of human tissues and cells. And then you have the implementation directive. So the EU Directive 2006/17 EC, this relates to the technical requirements for donation, procurement, and testing of human tissues and cells. So it relates specifically to information about the donor and other things as well. I'll go through those other things in the next few slides. And the other implementing directive is EU Directive 2006/83 EC, and this relates to, again, certain technical requirements for coding, for storage, distribution of human tissue cells and cells. It also conveys information about, accreditation for tissue establishments, and also the mechanics, if you like, of reporting serious adverse events and serious adverse reactions. So the EU Tissues and Cell Directive, it establishes a legal framework for the donation, procurement, testing, preservation, processing, storage and distribution of human tissues and cells. And this directive is pivotal for maintaining consistent and high standards across the EU member states. So the areas covered by the Directive 2004/23 EC are donation. There's a lot of information in this directive, and there's also in the implementation directive on donation. But basically, it's the overarching information relating to promoting voluntary and altruistic donation. It's to ensure that there are ethical standards, and it also talks about assessment of donors to ensure their suitability, eligibility criteria. The area also covered, the second area that's on the list, is procurement. So these are standardized and validated methods to obtain these samples in a way that minimizes contamination and ensures the quality of the material. And again, this also relates to having good processes in place for sterility and for safety. And then it also mandates testing, the sort of screenings for infectious diseases and other medical conditions, and the implementation of protocols for testing laboratories across the member states. And then processing, this is, protocols to, detail the handling procedures for tissues and cells. And these methods have to be validated, and the documentation in line with the quality standards there and available for inspection and auditing. Preservation, you want to maintain the viability of the tissues and cells over the storage period of time. Viability as in they're going to be, suitable, alive. You want to ensure that the correct preservation media and the correct preservation methods are used where appropriate. With regards to storage, you want to ensure that the tissues and cells are stored in a secure, controlled environment. In controlled environment in terms of controlling the conditions, preventing contamination, monitoring access, and regularly monitoring and maintaining these storage facilities. And last, the distribution. So any materials, tissues and cells, have to be released for clinical use, and therefore you have to ensure that there are certain safety and quality requirements that are met before these cells and tissues can be released. And again, when we're talking about distribution, we need to ensure that we have this tracking system available to ensure traceability. So these are the areas that are covered by the directive, and the implementation directives, which is 2006/17 EC, one of them, relates to donor eligibility. So you want to be screening the donors for diseases such as what is listed there: HIV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C. You also want to screen donors for other diseases such as malignancies. You want to have a comprehensive screening process in place. And this needs to include all of the screening requirements for all of the countries in the EU, because this is a directive. Each of the countries will implement it in a different way, and you need to do a gap analysis to ensure that you've got all of the information for all of the testing required for all of the countries in the EU. And in addition to that, you may need to take into consideration other region requirements such as the United States, Australia, Japan, particularly if at some point in the future you may wish to market in those countries. So you need to do a gap analysis to make sure that you've done all of the required testing right at that point, at the start, before you can use the materials for development, for research purposes, or for the preparation and manufacture of medicinal products. There are strict requirements for donor consent and compensation. You need to ensure that the rights of the donors are met. So this will be covered by, for example, an example would be privacy and general data protection regulation in the EU. Is covered by that. The donor is covered by their GDPR. Is protected, and their personal information kept personal. So this is the implementation directive 2006-17 EC. The other implementation directive is 2006-86 EC. Now this establishes the traceability requirements, specifying that tissues and cells must be traceable from donor to recipient and vice versa. And this is through unique identification codes. So that's really something that's very important, even when we go to the point of using these human tissues and cells for medicinal products. They have to be what's the word I'm looking for? Traceable, I guess. They have to be traceable from the donor to the recipient and vice versa. And that's really in order to report adverse events as well as adverse reactions and things like that. So you need to be able to make that or have that ability to trace the original donor if there's any issues with regards to the recipient. This implementation directive also defines the reporting procedures for serious adverse reactions and events. And it gives an example there where if there's a serious incident, the tissue establishment has to inform the competent authority within 24 hours. The implementation directive also outlines the requirements for coding, packaging and labeling of tissues and cells, just to ensure that you've got all the standardized labeling information, such as, for example, expiry dates and storage conditions. This example that's been given here is relating to, I think it's the International System for Blood. So that's a system that's used to standardize tissue labels across the member states. But I think that this relates to blood and not necessarily tissues and cells. Well, I do want to talk about good tissue practice because that's the focus of this presentation. So as I said, the use of human tissues and cells is a highly regulated area because of the potential for misuse and abuse. So we have to learn from our mistakes in terms of, the fact that we have contamination issues with regards to transmission of infectious diseases in the past. And we need to ensure that we have put in measures, and we have put in measures to ensure that those things don't happen again. But we want to apply those measures to other particular infectious diseases. So we have to learn from the mistakes in the past with regards to donor material, and we also have to take into consideration human nature. So it's really important to recognize that human tissues and cells come from real human beings, whether those human beings are alive or deceased. And there are laws protecting both the donors and their families and the recipients. So donor-related disease transmission risks have to be mitigated. And so you have to do a careful evaluation of the donor's medical history, their travel history, behavioral risks, history of malignancy, and I think also familial history of malignancy as well. And this is necessary to keep the risk of transmission of infections and malignancies to the recipient as low as possible. So in this slide, I've got some information on protecting the donor, ensuring that, any financial or material incentives are at a minimum. We want the reason for the donation of the tissues and cells to be altruistic and voluntary, not because of the fact that there's going to be some financial incentives, because that can, number one, lead to exploitation, but number two, if donors know that they are going to receive compensation and it's going to be significant, they may, for example, choose to donate when in actual fact it's not in their interest from a health perspective to do so, or they may not wish to divulge information that could potentially exclude them from those incentives. So it's really important to ensure that donation of tissues and cells is done from a voluntary and altruistic perspective from the donors. With regards to protecting the recipients, again, good tissue practice ensures or guarantees, I don't know whether guarantees, but it ensures the integrity and quality of the donated tissues and cells. And through rigorous testing, tracking, and handling, the potential for contamination or errors are minimized. So it just ensures that the recipients are not exposed to any unnecessary risks. I want to talk about the Council of Europe because there is a guide that I wish to talk about, and this is the Guide to Quality and Safety of Tissues and Cells for Human Application, and it's applicable to all of the countries in the or of the Council of Europe. So the Council of Europe is the EU's leading human rights organization. It's an international organization. It's based in Strasbourg, and it now includes 46 countries. So it's not the same as the European Council, which has 27 member states. But the EU, the Council of Europe, they are, well, this guide to the quality and safety of tissues and cells and for human application is applicable to all of the countries in the Council of Europe. So here's a list of all of the 46 member states of the Council of Europe, and this is where the guide to quality and safety of tissues and cells for human applications, the good tissue practice, this is where these are the countries that it's applicable to. There are also observers, and that includes Canada, Japan, Mexico, United States, and the Vatican City, it would seem. So to get this guidance document, you need to go onto the EDQM, the European Directorate for Quality of Medicines and Healthcare, the EDQM website, and under Tissues and Cells for Human Application Guide, you'll find this, and you just basically the EDQM will send you a link, and it's a free guidance document that you can download and you can use for you can refer to. It's a very comprehensive guide. As I said, it's the practical application of the directives, and it contains information not just on the directives itself, but on quality management, risk management, information on donors, GDPR and consent. It's a specific requirements for substances of human origin and specific organ information as well. The part that's really relevant and really important to read, I think, is Part A, the general requirements. All of this is relevant to the initial stage and the initial step of, using human materials for starting materials. So all of this quality management and validation, risk management, recruitment, donor evaluation, donor testing, procurement, premises, processing, storage, etc., etc. All of this information is relevant, and we have to, make an assessment with regards to the use of human tissues and cells, and they all have to comply with the relevant legislation in all of the countries, but they're all based upon this particular guidance. What is of interest to us is tissues and cells of starting material, but the guidance document also concerns and contains specific requirements for substances of human origins of various sorts. So, for example, ocular tissues, skin, pancreatic, islets. So, but the ones that we're of interest is tissues and cells of starting materials. This is good practice guidelines for tissue establishments and tissue and cell monographs. So as I said, this is a really useful document, the appendix, oh, I've just gone past it, but the appendix contains a lot of information like, root cause analysis, examples of consent forms, um, you know, fishbone, quality risk management and quality management. So it's and also GDPR. Right, in the US, the FDA have their own process for compliance and regulatory information relating to biologics, and particularly relating with biologic establishments and registration. So, like in the EU, it is divided into blood establishments and human cells, tissues, and cellular-based products. So it is divided kind of in the same way, but the Code of Federal Regulation that's applicable to human cells and tissues and cellular-based products is 21 CFR Part 1271, and this supersedes the 1270. So basically, this is about the registration of manufacturers and establishment, and the registration of the medicinal products, and how that is done, and who oversees that. So this is the actual Code of Federal Regulation. I've just given a screenshot of the actual FDA regulation, and you can Google that and you can see all the relevant information that is there. And yeah, as I said, it establishes the framework for human cells, tissues, and cellular and tissue-based products, medicinal products. Yeah, it covers the same sorts of things, which is donor eligibility, current good tissue practice, and tracking and traceability. And it's overseen by the Center of Biologics Evaluation and Research, that's CBER. And they have, as I say, they have a specific responsibility for human cells, tissues, and cellular and tissue-based products to ensure that there's safety, purity, potency, and effectiveness. So here's some more information on CBER. This relates to their guidance documents, and this relates to what we've already covered before, good tissue practice, the relevant code of federal regulation, part 1271, and basically what the expectations are, and that's relating to donor screening and testing, adverse reactions, and reporting, and use of innovative technologies in tissues and cell applications. By regulating through these statutes, the FDA ensures the safety and efficacy of donated human tissues and cells for their intended medical use, whilst protecting the donor and the recipient. So this is the US version. And they have a questions and answer document for industry. Here are examples of tissues and that are affected by this this regulation. Yeah, and just the requirement for tissue establishments to screen and test donors, prepare the relevant documentation, and for the prevention of communicable diseases. Right, now the UK. The UK Human Tissues Act 2004. This is the relevant, I would call it legislation or statutory instrument, I would say maybe, in the United Kingdom. It is derived from the Tissue and Cell Directive that I discussed earlier. I think it's 2004-23 EC. It's derived from that, and when the UK left the EU Withdrawal Act of 2020 ensures that the EU standards remain in place currently in the UK post-Brexit, but it has been adapted for UK specific framework. But in actual fact, these were directives, it wasn't a regulation. So each member state, they had their own legislation with regards to how tissues and cells of human origins were going to be managed with regards to transplantation and with regards to the use of human tissues and cells for as starting materials for research and for medicinal products. So the Human Tissue Act, this governs the removal, storage and use and disposal of human tissues and cells. And then we have some other implementation in this acts, and these are the quality and safety of organs, tissues and cell regulations, and this relates to cell banks and donor screening, traceability and record keeping. So these are I think these derive from the implementation directives. And then we've got human tissues, quality and safety for human application regulation 2007. And these are the technical standards related to the handling and application of tissues and cells. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and if there are any comments, please don't hesitate to leave them. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.